Let's talk now, though, to Fiona McAnena, Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters, because an historic victory for women is what it's being called on the front pages this morning. And indeed, it is an historic victory for women. Trans women are not women. It's that simple. In other words, trans women are men. Fiona, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I hope you haven't got too much of a hangover, because it was quite a day yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a huge day. It was the result that we and others have been campaigning for years, and it gives us a platform now to restore proper policies that give us back privacy and decency and dignity in all the places where single-sex provision matters. You know, we've always said sometimes it doesn't matter, but when sex does matter, it does mean biology. It means what you're born, male or female, and it's just an insult to have had to go all this way in order to win back a recognition that the rest of us knew all the time. And I should say it's the Campaign Group for Women in Scotland who brought this case. And then we as Sex Matters were an intervener, as were a lesbian group. And collectively, those contributions are what made the difference here.
Yes. And of course, the case was brought against the Scottish Government. And I mean, I don't know what that means for the Scottish Government, but there's a lot of interesting conversations now being had around various organisations like the NHS, like the judiciary, like prisons, like, like the police, and lots of other sort of what you might call, gender fluid organisations who have for a long time been very, very critical of anyone who wouldn't say that a trans woman could be a woman. And so where does that all go now?
Well, they all have to look hard at their policies now, because all this nonsense about it's difficult, it's complicated, we have to treat people in the gender they identify as, that can all be swept aside. And the law never really required them to do all that.
Right.
Just did it. But now the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has said, no, it's very simple. The Equality Act, where it says woman, it means a female person, it means how you're born. So those people will all have to look at their policies. We should see the end of, for example, changing rooms where people say, well, you identify in where you like.
Yes.
That's currently the subject of 2 court cases involving the NHS. There was already law about the workplace, of course. Yeah. Changing rooms were already supposed to be single sex. So this Equality Act stuff has really swept through everything, and everyone lost their mind over it. And hopefully now we can get back to really what most people wanted all along.
Yes. I mean, I heard a lot of callers yesterday calling this station and saying, for most people, this is not an issue. We are living in what used to be a very tolerant country. I like to think that we still do live in a tolerant country, and I don't have any problem with anybody who wants to live in any sort of different way that they wish. But it's just the kind of the people who were pushing this, need for legislation, this need for kind of, acceptance, this need for the rest of the majority of the country to actually somehow admit that men could be women, and that therefore they should be allowed to play women's sports, they should be allowed to gain access to women's changing rooms and go to women's prisons and all of that. That's where it started to get troublesome, wasn't it?
Yes, it's not about how people want to live their lives. It's about the negative impact on other people when they insist that their view of the world and their view of themselves is the one that's real, the one that matters, and other people's preferences and boundaries don't count. And it's a very simple principle all over the world that sometimes sex does matter. It matters in healthcare, for example. Yeah. It matters anywhere, particularly where women are in a state of undress or vulnerability. You mentioned sport. Of course, sport is played by bodies and not identities. And so the idea that we all have to keep stum and pretend that these men have become women is frankly insulting. And I will say that although the mood is extremely positive, and there was indeed considerable celebrating last night, people are still angry, and especially women are angry that they had to do this. We have, all of us collectively, fundraised hundreds of millions of pounds for this case and for others. People have risked their jobs. Women in particular have lost their jobs. Yeah. So the government hasn't been doing its job. The government said there isn't a problem. Well, clearly there was a problem. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so many members of this government in particular, and I'm thinking of David Lammy, I'm thinking of Keir Starmer, I'm thinking of, Yvette Cooper, so many of the senior members, Rachel Reeves probably as well, so many senior members of this cabinet struggled to identify what a woman was and found it a really embarrassing question. They used to say things like, oh, well, we don't want to have this debate. It's a very difficult, complicated issue. Well, it isn't, is it?
It's a very simple issue, and just because they don't like it, they now cannot avoid it. And that's the reason I think people are so delighted. We've got this simple, clear answer that we all knew all along, Mike. There are men, there are women. You can't change that. Sometimes you can't ignore it.
Exactly right. And I said this yesterday on Talk. I was on Jeremy Carl's show. I think Keir Starmer, actually, who's missing in action right now because he's apparently taking a holiday, despite the fact that there's quite a lot going on that maybe he should be addressing. He said nothing so far about this ruling, but as a lawyer, right, he makes a big deal about the fact that, you know, he's a lawyer, he believes in the legal framework, he believes in his time as a prosecutor in the CPS. He was a very ardent prosecutor of wrongdoing. He was a man that knew the letter of the law and acted upon it and only acted upon it. What he should surely say now is that the law now says that a woman is a woman only if she's born a biological woman, and a trans woman is not a woman. And I was wrong to say that was incorrect in the past. He needs to come out and say that, doesn't he?
Well, we'll see what he has to say. What we're most interested in is that organisations are forced now to follow the law and to restore the kind of protections and policies that we used to have, so that everyone can live within the peace and, you know, dignity and that we expect. The trans lobby has talked about their wish for just to live, get on with their lives and live quietly and with dignity, but that's not how this played out. And the price was paid mostly by women and also by children who, you know, were victims of the kind of pressures of believing that you could be in the wrong body. Women in particular having to share private spaces with men. So we want to see the politicians come out with a very clear statement that says, yes, sex matters. This is where it matters. The Equality Act makes clear when you can and you should provide single-sex services and spaces, and now we want to see everyone do that.
Right. And what is the legal position now then, as far as you are concerned, with regard to sport? Because a lot of elite sports have sort of seen sense and have decided that, you know, women can only play in women's sports if they are biological women, but not all of them. But certainly a lot of people tell me that the grassroots levels are actually worse in terms of the numbers of men, frankly, or boys who are allowed to play sport as women.
Yeah, it's terrible at grassroots level, because that's a really meaningless distinction. You know, what that is an admission of is that it really does matter in sport, that it is not fair to let boys or men play in women's sport, but somehow most women don't matter. Right. Only the ones making a living out of it. So what this means for sport is the law was already pretty clear and sports bodies just weren't acting on it. So this gives us a lever now to say, right, you cannot claim that the law requires you to do this. And of course, the other big thing is what happens off the playing field, because, you know, what you do in competition is one thing, but if you come off the hockey pitch or the football field or whatever, and you go into a changing room, and as a woman, you find there's a man in there, it's very off-putting.
Yes.
So, swimming is another area where it's not competitive sport, so it's been very ambiguous under the law. A lot of women are horrified by having to share swimming changing rooms and indeed female-only swim sessions with men who say they're women. So this gives us really the best possible rationale to push harder.
So if anyone finds themselves in a situation, and I'm thinking just of ordinary families here, who maybe may have a daughter who wants to, you know, be a swimmer, but in her school or in her swimming club, you know, there are boys swimming as women, will they be entitled to say to those people organising such events, you're breaking the law?
If those events have been billed as being women only or female only, then yes, it's a false promise. No one has to organise single-sex activities, but if they do organise them, or if they put a sign that says female on the door of the changing room, they're making a promise to you, and they're relying on the Equality Act. And in the Equality Act, that means based on your body and based on how you were born. So yes, they will have a basis to say you've got this wrong. But I think we're all going to have to do a lot of talking and a lot of letter writing to get people to understand that self-ID, letting a man just identify as a woman, is not the law. It never has been.
Yes.
And yet we've had it in place. But now this ruling gives us every opportunity to push hard. And we'll be creating resources on our website, sexmatters.org, to help people you know, make those claims.
Right. And what about pronouns? Will those be now done away with? I mean, will people still go they, them, you know, he, her, she, him, whatever it is? Ha ha.
Well, one of the things the judges said is that gender reassignment is the characteristic in the Equality Act that protects people who say that they are not the sex they were born. And that's always been the case.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be discriminated against or harassed. And again, that's always been the case, and that's as it should be. If a workplace wants to decide that, you know, pronouns are essential, that's a bit borderline because they're imposing that belief on their workers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you go around, you know, being offensive or abusive to colleagues, then an employer may take issue with that. And that's why pronouns have been such a contested area, because if the trans lobby say that that's deeply hurtful and offensive, the minute you call someone or refer to someone as you see them, you know, by the correct pronouns. So I think that's going to be still a bit of a battleground. This law doesn't say that you can and you must always speak correctly and accurately about someone.
Right.
Thankfully, they didn't say anything about pronouns.
No. Well, we'll wait and see, I guess, how it all washes out in the next few days. But thank you, as ever, Fiona, for the campaign, at least. And thank you for joining us this morning. Fiona McAnena, Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters. Just